Hi, I am Madison. The fact that I was born to parents who were already in their 40s makes me seem like an afterthought. For them, having a daughter of 10 years old was plenty. My mom constantly told me, "We didn't plan for you." Not intentionally, but matter-of-factly, as if describing the weather. She was going to say more, but she would suddenly trail off and leave off the part about how your grandparents were so insistent. I was brought here to make it official. My parents were hesitant to have another child, but my maternal grandparents persuaded them to do it. With the hope of having a second grandchild, they were ecstatic. On the other hand, my parents saw me as a burden they hadn't necessarily requested. Upon my arrival, I found my sister Sarah well into her adolescent years. She exhibited neither harshness nor malice. For all intents and purposes, she ignored me. In one corner of our living room, I played with my dolls while she sat on the couch, obliviously talking on the phone about guys and college applications. Mom would insist, "Sarah, honey, make sure you put your SAT study materials in your backpack," before she would go on to another task. While all was going on, I waited at the kitchen table for someone to see that I was sitting there and needed assistance with my schoolwork. Help was infrequent. Rather, my parents established a pattern that molded my upbringing. They would take me to my grandparents' place first thing in the morning. As he got ready to go for work, my dad would tell my grandpa, "You wanted her? Well, this key's jingled in his hand. She's all yours." I felt truly at home in my grandparents' house. They collected me from school, assisted with my assignments, brought me to the park, and ensured that I was well nourished and looked after. It was only very late at night that my parents would arrive to get me. They would appear exhausted and just a little bit irritated that they had to travel all that far. My grandma would always tell me, "Madison, you're the best thing that ever happened to us," as we embraced each night. Enshrouded in her comforting arms, I could nearly lose track of time when we were together. From one year to the next, this trend persisted. I figured out how to get by in life as an afterthought at home while my sister got ready for her promising future. However, the affection of my grandparents remained firm and unchanging. What it means to be genuinely cherished was something I picked up in their home. While we worked on my arithmetic homework, my grandpa reminded me that sometimes the best things in life aren't planned. The words stuck with me. When he winked at me, I felt a temporary relief from the burden of being unwelcome. It seemed like things might finally settle down at home when Sarah departed for college. Perhaps my parents would recognize the daughter who stayed behind, me. There is no way I was more incorrect. A voice called Madison rang out to me as I set down my school bag on the floor after recess. "Housekeeping is in order. Make a beeline for the restrooms." A plethora of new duties, including those that had previously been Sarah's, fell on my shoulders. I became very familiar with the washing machine and its peculiarities because it was always by my side. "I'm your neighbor." Whenever I was hesitant, my dad would remind me that I needed to make a contribution. "Your sister always did her part." When I was 14 years old, I moved up from housekeeping to the kitchen. It was sudden. My mom made the simple announcement, "You're old enough now," one morning. Upon our return from work, we anticipate that supper will be prepared. On the very first evening, I cooked spaghetti. It was still palatable, but a little overdone. Until my dad lifted his eyes from his plate, my parents dined in quiet. He stated, "Tomorrow, try something with chicken," but his tone made it obvious that he wasn't making a suggestion. College dreams were my only escape. After I finished washing the dishes each night, I would go back to my room and spend time on academic websites. Away from the monotony of daily tasks and the icy stillness of college, I envisioned myself strolling across campus. Sarah returned home with news that altered my life forever when I was 16 years old. With a tall, well-dressed man trailing behind her, she burst through the front door on a Sunday afternoon. "Mom, Dad," she said in a shrill voice, "Introducing James. Yes, we are engaged. Someone must have recently won the lotto, because this is so unexpected." My folks were so shocked that they sprung out of their seats. A flood of happiness washed over my mom. The phone to contact family was already in my father's hand. "We'll cover everything," my mom exclaimed while embracing Sarah. "Our first daughter's wedding has to be perfect." Our home was engulfed with wedding preparations for months. Flowers, locations, and guest lists were the topics of every discussion. Things from designer clothes to premium vendors to top-tier things seemed to be funded effortlessly. Despite their attendance, my grandparents appeared uneasy about the wedding's excess. An ice sculpture that was likely more expensive than a semester of college tuition attracted my grandma's disapproval. I sat down to supper 2 years later with 3 acceptance letters from different colleges laid out in front of me. I had finally gotten into all my dream schools after years of pretending to be Cinderella and getting straight A's. As I broke the wonderful news to my parents, my heart was racing. "That's nice," my mom said, her gaze fixed on her dish. "However, we are unable to cover its expense. Your sister's wedding drained our savings and even forced us to take out a loan. Nothing remains for university. You paid for Sarah's college." My voice stutters. "That was unique," my mom said at that moment. "We saw a potential in her." Everyone at the table sat in utter quiet. My dad always told me to acquire a job, put some money aside, borrow money for your education. That's the behavior expected of mature people. As I got up from the table, tears started to form in my eyes. I dialed my grandma's number for the very first time. Tears were running down my face as I walked through their familiar front door within minutes. My grandma pulled me into an embrace and whispered, "Oh, sweetheart." My grandfather's countenance hardened as I recounted every detail, although an unreadable sparkle remained in his eyes. He whispered, "Madison," as he took hold of my hand, "we've been expecting something like this." "What do you mean?" "We've been putting money aside for your schooling from the moment you came into this world," my grandpa told me. Bank statements fell out of a drawer he had opened. "You are free to select any one of the 3 universities. Don't worry, we've got this." I returned home that night and began to gather my belongings. Upon learning that I would be residing with my grandparents, my parents hardly batted an eye. "Whatever you think is best," my mother responded, her gaze fixed on the television. Did she just let out a sigh of relief? Everything that followed was a whirlwind of college preparations. Financial analysis was my chosen field of study. Observing my parents' poor financial management had inspired me to handle things properly. The first day of class was like entering a whole new universe. Real potential was seen in me for the first time by someone other than my grandparents. During the height of my second year of university, my grandma phoned to share some intriguing news regarding Sarah. She mentioned that your sister's having trouble on one of our weekly conversations. James is jobless and her marketing career isn't taking off like she had imagined. They're constantly asking your parents for money. When she informed me that they were receiving it, I wasn't surprised. Last month, your mom took money out of her retirement to pay rent, my grandma said with a sigh. They just can't say no to her. Things worsened a year later. No amount of assistance from our parents could help Sarah and James pay the rent. They returned to my former bedroom, the one I had painstakingly maintained immaculate for many years. I couldn't help but notice the irony. At the same time, I was flourishing. My instructors set me up with internships at prestigious financial firms where I worked on my ability to solve complex financial challenges. With the completion of each difficult task, my conviction that I had made the correct decision grew. You've got a natural instinct for this, my boss at Morgan Stanley informed me at my performance assessment. We'd love to have you back next summer. With the exception of phone conversations with my grandparents, I buried my head in my work and paid close attention in class. While I was a senior in high school, I paid them a visit and could see right away that something was up. My grandfather, who is normally quick with a joke, sat quietly in his armchair, and my grandmother's usually warm smile appeared forced. Unspoken words weighed down the house. "What's wrong?" As I observed them rearranging their food on the dinner plate, I posed the question. And you can't dismiss it as insignificant. I am familiar with both of you. I recognized the glance they exchanged. It was the one that always seemed to indicate they were attempting to shield me from harm. My grandpa finally talked. "Your parents dropped by to see us last week," he remarked, his voice betraying excessive wariness. "They wanted their inheritance early." "What do you mean?" "My fork is abandoned. They're having problems with the banks, my grandma told me. A plethora of loans and credit card balances. In order to stay out of bankruptcy, they said they needed $200,000, and you gave it to them." I lost control of my voice as I expressed my displeasure. Grandpa gave a subtle nod. "Madison, that was necessary. In spite of everything, they are still our daughter and son-in-law. It was most of our savings." "Most of your savings." I lost my cool. After everything they'd done, after how they'd enabled Sarah's irresponsible behavior, after how they treated me, they had the nerve to demand money from the only people who'd ever truly cared for me. It was all because they were unable to control their own spending or refuse Sarah's advances. Following graduation, all of my efforts were rewarded. I was able to secure a position at a prominent financial firm in the city thanks to the excellent references from my professors and my impressive internship experiences. I could never have imagined earning such a high starting pay. The one-bedroom apartment I located was simple, unadorned, and secure. I was thankful every morning that no one but myself needed my breakfast. When I plunged myself into new challenges, my career took off, and I got promotions and bonuses that my younger self would never have dreamed of. A down payment on my own house was within my reach within a few years of saving enough. On the day I signed the mortgage paperwork, I kept thinking about Sarah and my parents, who had never been good with money and had never been able to buy a home. I don't think they were aware of my achievement. I hadn't heard from you in years. Next, the call that altered the course of events arrived. A huge heart attack had struck my grandpa. He had already left the hospital when I got there. My grandma, who had spent more than half a century by his side, appeared to lose her luster after that. A little over 2 months after that, she trailed after him. At the funeral home, I was making arrangements for my grandma's burial when I recognized a voice behind me. "Madison, do you want some help with the arrangements?" My mother stood there, appearing much older and exhausted than I remembered. I turned to face her. I was on the verge of telling her to go, but her expression gave me the willies. "Sure," I thought I heard myself say. "That would be nice." In the days leading up to the funeral, my parents started to relax and share more personal details. Their struggles were acknowledged. They had been financially hurt by retirement. My dad admitted to me one afternoon as we were bouquet shopping, "We barely make ends meet." And with Sarah's twins. I was unaware of this. "Yes, little children," my mom said. "They require a great deal, yet what lovely boys. Since Sarah and James are still unable to handle things alone, we pitch in wherever we can." Maintained an expressionless nod. "You can't change some things." We gathered in a wood-paneled office a week after my grandmother's funeral to hear her. We'll read. Sarah and James slumped in chairs next to my parents as I sat across from them. A knife might pierce the heavy tension in the room, which smelled like dusty old documents and furniture polish. After adjusting his spectacles, the notary, Mr. Patterson, started reading with a monotone voice. What followed made everyone sit up straight, unlike the typical legal verbiage. "To our beloved granddaughter, Madison," said, "we leave our house at 1542 Maple Street and the sum of $150,000. Following this, there was an ear-piercing quiet. Sarah was taken aback. My mother's knuckles became white as she clenched my father's arm. Mr. Patterson proceeded after clearing his throat. And a personal note from Mr. Henderson to his daughter Margaret. He glanced over to my mom. "Margaret, keep in mind that we loaned you $200,000 during a time when you really needed it. The note says, 'We hope you will honor this final decision the way we have honored your requirements.'" In an instant, my mom's face turned red and then pale. My dad just stared at the floor as Sarah and James looked at each other anxiously. My folks came up to me in the parking lot after the notary had finished and collected his paperwork. Their previously competent approach throughout the funeral arrangements had been replaced with an almost desperate one. "Madison, honey," my mom started, her voice quivering. "You must comprehend. We kept expecting to be the heirs to the house. That was our hope." My dad mentioned, "We're struggling," as he ran his fingers over his gray hair. "The mortgage, Sarah's family's expenses. We could really use the house." As I stared at them, memories of my years of unacknowledgement, rejection, and lack of support for my schooling flooded back. Hardly saying no, I responded, "That house belongs to me. In the end, that is what the grandparents intended." They persisted in begging as they trailed behind me to my vehicle, but I refused to budge. Additionally, Sarah spoke up about the importance of having a yard for her boys to play in. Nonetheless, I hopped in my vehicle and bolted. The next week, I received a call. The voice on the other end was my mom, inviting me over for supper. She seemed more modest, maybe in the tone of her speech. I consented while it was in my best interest not to. It felt like going back in time when I pulled up to the house where I grew up, except that everything looked worse than I recalled. The gutters drooped, the paint was flaking off, and the lawn, which had been perfect before, was now uneven and overgrown. Though packed, the house was spotless on the inside. James half-heartedly pleaded with Sarah's twin boys, Jake and Tommy, to calm down as they raced around the living room. The boys were adorable. They inherited James's wavy hair and Sarah's eyes. "Madison," my mom said with a smile as she drew me into an uncomfortable embrace, "we made your favorite pot roast." As soon as I said it, I knew it wasn't my favorite. That's Sarah's favorite. My father finally broke the awkward stillness by clearing his throat. "Then why don't you just tell us what you like to eat? Could you please tell us?" It was surprising how interested they appeared to be. I was bombarded with questions regarding my employment, residence, and interests while we were eating supper. When I explained my job in finance, they paid attention, even though I could tell they didn't understand a word. One supper sparked another, then another. Very quickly, I was spending holidays with them, shopping for the twins, and even pitching in to help Sarah with her homework on occasion. I found myself volunteering to assist when they brought up the fact that the house needed repairs. I had the roof replaced, the heating system serviced, and the exterior painted. My parents would get emotional every time I sent a check because they were so grateful. "You're too kind to us," my mom would tell me while embracing me. "We don't deserve this." I would silently think, "You're right," because I wanted to believe that people could change, even though I had experienced so much hurt and neglect over the years. Years went by, and I kept climbing the corporate ladder. Opportunities multiplied with each promotion, and my investment portfolio expanded greatly. My bond with my parents, however, appeared to be growing stronger. I wanted to do something special for them because they were getting on in years. They were both well into their 70s at this point. "I've been thinking," I remarked as I watched my father clumsily rise from his chair at one of our Sunday dinners, "I don't think this place is still a good fit for you. For your retirement years, I would like to purchase a house for you. Ideally, a single-story home with a lovely garden that requires less upkeep." It took me by surprise when they reacted with tears of delight. We spent the following weeks looking for a house and finally discovered it, a lovely ranch-style property in a peaceful area with plenty of natural light, spacious rooms, and no stairs. My folks couldn't contain their excitement once I closed my checkbook. My dad made it clear that we needed to throw a big housewarming bash. "Let us arrange everything. It's the least we can do." I said that would be lovely, and I intended to give them the instrument at the party. "Just let me know when." Time elapsed. Despite my professional commitments, I couldn't help but anticipate an invitation. I began inquiring about the date when I heard nothing further. By saying, "Oh, we're still planning," my mom would encourage me. "These things take time, as you are well aware. The perfection we desire is our goal," my father would say. "We'll let you know soon." I couldn't help but feel irritated by their imprecise replies. I remember one night, after fielding my mother's phone call once again, that I was on Facebook, searching for Sarah. We weren't connected on any social media, and I hadn't glanced at her profile in years. Just a few hours ago, there it was. "I can't wait till this Saturday when we celebrate Mom and Dad's new house. What a beautiful house. I can't wait to have everyone over for the celebration." Dozens of friends and family members confirmed their presence in the comments section of the post. Pictures showed the decor being set up and the caterers being reserved. This was not an impromptu get-together. Weeks had passed in preparation for this. A little trembling in my palm, I contacted my mom. "Hi, Mom." I spoke in a very informal tone. "I wanted to touch base regarding the housewarming party. Is a date still up in the air?" Her response was a suave, "Oh, honey, not yet. It will likely be in a few weeks. The details are still being ironed out. It is our hope that everyone are able to attend. It would appear that everyone else is wrong." I bought a house that Saturday and parked my automobile a block away. As night fell, sounds of music and laughter filled the air. Dozens of people were milling about outside the house, and I could make out familiar faces among them. Friends of my parents, Sarah's social circle, and relatives. The entryway had been left unlocked. Obviously, it was. Everyone but the house's rightful owner was invited. As soon as I heard my dad's voice, I crept in silently and made my way to the living room. He spoke to a rapt audience and said, "And after all these years of hard work, we finally did it. Bought our dream home. And make sure Sarah is mentioned," my mom interjected with a boast. The down payment was much assisted by her. Her selfless dedication to her parents is quite admirable. My mom made a pointed remark in response to someone saying, "Unlike some people, our younger daughter has been completely unhelpful, likely preoccupied with her work to give a hoot about her loved ones." As the concert began, I stood in the doorway, feeling the heat radiate up my face. In the house I purchased, Sarah's twin boys, aged 7, ran amok among the guests as she grinned at them. To everyone's surprise, I yelled out, "Actually, I think you've got that backwards." My parents' expressions became lifeless. In the midst of the hushed conversation, onlookers fixed their gaze on me. As soon as he regained consciousness, my father yelled out, "Madison?" with a toothy grin. What a surprise! My response was, "I'm sure it is," and I entered the room, especially since you forgot to invite me to the housewarming party for the house I bought. There was complete stillness in the room. Sarah's spouse developed an intense crush on his footwear out of nowhere. "Well," my mom said with a hint of spite in her voice, "what's done is done. It was purchased by you. Now it belongs to us. No one will ever be eternally grateful to you." "That's right," my dad chimed in, his voice filled with assurance. "To be quite honest, you are not welcome here. Sarah and her family will also be staying here, as my mom announced, so it's a big family get-together. They've already sold their house. It's all arranged." Laughter escaped me, a chilly, sharp sound that sent a few visitors ducking for cover. A folder was extracted from my luggage by me. "Something seems to be confusing you," I remarked as I opened the packet, exposing the ownership paperwork and deed. "The ownership of this house is mine. No one ever told me to give it to you. At what I believe to be an appropriate housewarming celebration tonight, I was going to present it to you." Paleness turned to asheness on my mother's face. A sputtering sound came from my dad. And now I turned to speak to the visitors who were taken aback. "I would prefer that everyone depart. The celebration has over, and this is my home." My mom's voice grew shrill as she exclaimed, "You're not capable of doing this. We're your parents." "No," I whispered softly. "To me, you're nothing more than my parents. My grandparents, who are my biological parents, instilled in me the value of family beyond blood ties. Because of everything I learned from them about money, I am the proud owner of this house, why or not." Sarah, my parents, James, the twins, and all of their guests departed in tears. As they drove off, one by one, until the street was deserted, I observed from the front porch. Their decision to sell their property and utilize the proceeds to purchase an apartment was revealed to me after a few weeks. They brought their twins, Sarah and James, to live with them. I disabled their numbers, emails, and social media accounts, but they persisted in trying to call me for weeks. "Is it the dwelling?" Months later, I deposited the proceeds into my bank account after selling it. I made a pact with myself that when the time comes for me to have a family of my own, my children will never have to work for my affection or consideration. Like my grandparents loved me, I will love my children equally and without condition. Unlike my parents,